This episode is sponsored by Audioboom subscription plan, Audible, and 4Hymns. Empty Frames is an independent production. The commentary expressed here is our own and does not reflect the opinions of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum or its staff. To learn more about the museum, including the 1990 theft, please visit the museum's website at www.isgm.org. If you have any critical information relating specifically to the 1990 theft, please contact the museum's security director via the options provided on the museum's website. The museum continues to offer a reward totaling $10 million for information that can lead to the return of the stolen artwork.
We are bothered by the loss the art world suffered in 1990, and we are not content with the status quo. One stolen painting to note is from Monet, a French artist who created Che Tortoni, circa 1880. It's an elegant depiction of a man sketching a half-consumed beer on the table as he calmly looks at his audience. We started this podcast to raise awareness of the theft and to show our support for the ongoing recovery efforts. While those recovery efforts progress, as they do daily, we encourage our listeners to visit the museum, to appreciate its incredible collection, both past and present, and to donate directly to the museum through its website.
Again, if you enjoy this podcast and you feel as we do about the missing artwork, the most productive way for you to express your view is to donate directly to the Gardner Museum via its website. Go to isgm.org and look for the Join and Give tab, where there are options to make a donation of any size to support the museum's mission. Please donate today.
And when you do, let us know on Twitter so we can personally thank you there. Thanks again.
On March 18th, 1990, the most audacious art heist of all time took place at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Two men dressed as police officers were admitted into the building by security, claiming to be responding to a disturbance call.
In 81 minutes, 13 pieces of art were stolen. Among the portraits, stripped from their frames, were works by Vermeer, Degas, and Rembrandt. Estimated at $500 million, the heist has been categorized as the largest and most frustrating of all time. Theories of their whereabouts and those who perpetrated the crime are abundant.
In this podcast series, we will dig as deep as possible into the case, the theories, and the social and economic impact the greatest unsolved art heist of all time had on the community. This is Empty Frames, a heist story. Welcome back to Empty Frames. I'm Tim here today with Lance in the Crawlspace Wormtown Studios. How's it going, Lance?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well today. This interview we have, Lance, is really fascinating. It's with Marjorie Galas, who is a former worker at the Gardner Museum.
As these things go with us, when we look into certain cases, we let the case take us where it goes, and we follow that direction. And the direction it's been going lately has been former guards. We spoke with Jeffrey Rockwell, who was a guard right before the heist. And here we talked to Marj, who was employed by the museum right before and during the heist. And as far as I know, this hasn't been public, what she says here.
Not that I know of either, and it's kind of bombshelly, Lance. So let's waste no more time, and let's just play this interview, and you can let us know what you think on Twitter at empty_frames. We're also on Instagram and Facebook. Join in the conversation. Let us know what you think of this interview. Hope you like it. Thank you for listening. So Marj, welcome to Empty Frames. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm very well. Thank you.
Marj, you were a guard at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in 1988. Is that correct?
Sounds so long ago and far away, but yes, that is correct.
You performed your duties as a guard. What were these duties as a guard? Not to be confused with night watch.
Well, in 1988, I was strictly a gallery guard at that point. I didn't become a person that worked at the watch desk, alarm control operator, until probably late in 89 or 90. In 88, I was still a college student, and I would work part-time as a gallery guard, during the days, overseeing visitors as they came into the galleries and making sure that they weren't touching anything or doing anything devious.
Did you have a lot of experience with people doing anything devious, or was it a pretty low impact job?
Nothing devious, and I don't know why I pulled that word out of the air. It's just a good word. I think for the most part, it was just ensuring that people were being respectful of the art and not touching the art. I didn't have any experiences with anyone trying to lift anything or steal anything. I don't think anything like that at that time occurred in the museum. So neither I nor any of my colleagues at that point really experienced anyone doing, anything nefarious like that. Another good word for you.
Love that word. Did you work there during the heist?
I did. So during that period, it was several years later, and I had graduated from college. I had taken a different job initially and still continued doing the gallery guard. I'm giving you a little background up to the heist. I got offered the job in the alarm control center at some point. I don't recall the date, and left the full-time job I had. I was working at a store called Charette's, which was an art supply store. So I left that, took on the alarm control center / receptionist job. So what my responsibilities were at that time, I was the person that basically worked Monday through Friday during that main shift. I think it started at 7:30 and went to 3:30. So it was basically the bulk of the day when staff were arriving, when contractors were arriving, during the, open hours of the museum while the visitors were there entering. I oversaw everything from the back end, oversaw the activities of the museum, and handled phone calls and assisted the staff with their needs. So, a lot of that sort of receptionist / administrative type of work, but also still monitoring and ensuring the safety of the museum.
Okay. And that was what you did at the alarm control center?
That's right. That's what it was called at the time. I think it was called security desk / alarm control / receptionist. Nice hyphenated title.
It sounds so official.
Or I might have created that title over time. I'm not exactly sure what the title was called it might have just been watch desk.
What drew you to this job? Was it the museum? Was it the art? Were you a fan of the art?
At the time when I started working, when I was a gallery guard, I was an art major. I went to Emmanuel College, and I was getting my BFA in studio art. So having the ability to work in an art museum that was curated by a well-known woman in Boston society, and a creation that was very eclectic, that covered a lot of different periods and a lot of different masters, was a fantastic opportunity. Just to be in that environment was a fantastic opportunity. So I think that was what drew me, not necessarily being a security guard, but, that also, I guess, had a specific appeal to be the person that had that responsibility to keep that artwork safe. I feel at the time, and I would still now if I was about to approach that sort of career again, I would take that sort of responsibility very seriously.
Yeah, that's really cool that you had the opportunity to take your interest in studio art and you had this opportunity to go into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And as we talk to more people, we find that that's kind of the case. We've spoken to other night watch people. We spoke to a gentleman, Jeffrey Rockwell, and he was a night watchman over there right before the heist happened. He actually lives in New York right now as an artist, but that was
cool.
That's what he was going to school for. And I think that draws a lot of people to it, like it drew you to it.
Yeah, I think anyone that you would find working at an art museum, I think they're there because they have an interest in either that artistic application or just being in an environment that inspires that creativity. The Gardner attracted a lot of musicians as well. And at that time, and still to this day, I've been to the Gardner. I no longer live in Massachusetts, but when I return, I've had the opportunity to go back and see the new wing that was built and the fantastic concert hall that they have. And music has always been a big part of what the Gardner offered. So I think that attracted a lot of the musicians as well to be in that environment, to have those opportunities to work in that gallery at that time, anyways, in the gallery where the concerts were held, and just to be inspired by, a creative setting and the creative type of people that come to, or the people that have an interest in art that come to visit the museum.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because there's not a lot of focus that goes on the music aspect of the museum. That's it's cool that there's a bunch of different angles that pulled people in to to be employed there just to experience and be in that world.
Sure. And I think the courtyard is another one too. I don't know if people necessarily would apply to work in the museum because they have an interest in horticulture, but I think that element, that life that's brought into the museum, the aspect of something that's living and growing and colorful and beautiful in its own creation, just adds to the experience of what the museum's about.
What are your thoughts on the stolen artwork? Your memories of them?
There's a lot of different context around that question. I think the first thing I think of when I think of the stolen artwork is just the way that some of it was lifted, in particular the storm on the Sea of Galilee, where I think it's well reported and established that the painting was cut out of its frame and severely damaged, where conservation found paint chips on the floor. So when I think about the stolen artwork, I first think about what condition is it in now. Not only does the question linger of who's in possession of it or where it might possibly be kept, but just is it in some sort of airproof container, or is it just in some sort of box where the elements are getting to it and further ravishing it? So, when I think of the art, those are the elements that come to mind first. But if I think about it before the robbery, when one was able to experience it and be in front of it, I mean, they were all very unique pieces and very rare pieces. I love the story and the composition and just the expression that was captured in Storm of the Sea of Galilee. It's interesting when you think back on that painting to see the men on the ship over, hurling overboard, being sick, caught in the storm. I think a lot about the Vermeer, because that was a very unique piece. I don't think I had encountered a Vermeer before working at the Gardner. So it was, again, another one that was very interesting to look at in a composition, in the level of its composition. And my favorite, now I'm forgetting the name of my favorite, which is a little embarrassing, but there was a Monet painting that was stolen from the Blue Room. And again, it was something that just captured this expression, this gentleman. I always imagined he was in some sort of London cafe drinking a aperitif. He had this sort of sly look in his eye, looking towards the viewer. So that was a painting that I always enjoyed looking at.
That's Tim's favorite as well.
Che Tortoni.
That's the Che Tortoni.
Yeah, love that one. If you're a fan of podcasts, then obviously you are, because you're listening to this. Chances are you've thought about starting your own.
Tim, people often ask, once you've recorded your show, what are the next steps? How do you reach listeners and build an audience?
Audioboom can help with their $9.99 monthly subscription plan for hosting and distribution.
What do you get for $9.99?
You get 200 minutes of recording time for each episode. Well, that's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. A branded homepage on the Audioboom platform, that helps quite a bit.
Lovely. Embeddable players for web and social media, helpful.
Yep, unlimited storage. You don't know how important that is until you need it.
It gets costly. Episode scheduling.
Plus,
thanks to Audioboom's partnerships with leading distribution and streaming platforms, your show may be eligible for placement on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn, pending approval by each platform.
I'm a big fan of advanced analytics. Audioboom's got some of that. Talk to me about that.
Oh, you know it. You will be able to see how often your show has been downloaded, what devices your audience use to listen to your show.
Can I see the age, gender, and location of my listeners?
Bingo bango. So much more, too. So sign up today for your $9.99 monthly subscription plan by going to audioboom.com/start and sign up today.
I'm going to spell it out. That's Audioboom, AUDIOBOOM.com/start.
START. Sign up now and get the support you need to start your podcast today.
That's audioboom.com/start. You were there when the heist happened.
I worked at the museum. I wasn't obviously. I wasn't Randy or
I was trying to.
He was trying to catch you.
Where were you the night of?
There, I think that must have been such a crazy time.
At that time, I lived with a group of guys that had all either applied to work at the Gardner or were working at the Gardner. I think there were 3 of us that were Gardner employees that all lived together. And one of the guys that was there during the robbery was my roommate at the time. So it was particularly odd to have that close of a connection. So not only was I working there, but, was rooming with someone that was directly involved, that had been tied up and threatened and had this horrible experience that those guys undertook. So
I'm sorry to interrupt. Your roommate is the other guard, not Abbott.
Not Rick. Right, correct.
What was his name?
Randy.
What was the talk between you three and like the other folks that you worked with? Did everyone have a theory? Because was it right away that the idea that there was potentially an inside angle, did that pop up publicly like right away? Was everyone at the Gardner talking about that?
Well, I think initially it was just a shocking circumstance. Just to go back, and I will answer your question, but just to go back a little bit to your previous question about what was it like, that I had worked a night shift the night before the robbery, and then the night of the robbery, it was St. Patrick's Day. We had my roommates and we had people come over. I had already done a double shift. I got called to go in. I didn't want to because I wanted to be able to enjoy the company coming over, and enjoy St. Patrick's Day and drink a Guinness. So that was where my priorities, stood that evening. To go back to your question, so Randy, after that period, that was a traumatic experience. And just like any sort of traumatic experience, I think he experienced a lot of feelings and emotions and probably a lot of fear. He was never an extremely verbose guy to begin with, and he became far less so after that period. He retreated and didn't really want to talk much about anything. So he and I and any of the other guards or roommates or people, we never sat around and theorized about what had happened. I think for myself personally, because I worked there during the day, I've developed my own theories about who it could have been just from the experiences that I had with different people that I had encountered, weeks or months before that event. I'm sure you probably want me to go on about that.
Yes, please.
There at that time, I think it was either the beginning of the construction of the glass panels on the roof, and forgive me for getting. I think it was a climate control project. There might have been a more specific term for it, and you'll have to forgive me because it's been a little while. But there were a lot of different workmen coming in and out, and most of them were very respectful. But just before that time, and I had told the FBI about this at the time because they interviewed every single person that worked at the museum. There was a man that at one point was very disrespectful, disobedient. He would try to work his way back behind my desk. So there was a little gate, it was just a swinging gate. It wasn't something that you could lock or anything, but it clearly was a door that you wouldn't enter if you weren't invited to enter. So he would try to work his way back behind the desk, and I had to, tell him you're not allowed back here. Then he wanted to go into the security office, which was just to the left of the desk. And I also told him, you cannot be in that office either. You can't make phone calls or do personal business in that office. I can't allow you in there. And the guy, I'm behind the desk. I'm not in front of that office. The guy got into the office anyhow. So I had to call one of the supervisors on duty that day because he just wouldn't listen to me. He went into that office. He closed the door. He was in there for a while doing who knows what. That's where, at that time, and this isn't any new information for you, that's where all of the recording devices for the tapes were kept. That's where the thieves had broken into that door and stole those recording devices. It seems like it was an inside job, especially from information that's come to light even in the last, couple of years. But there also was that there were opportunities for people to gather information in these sort of activities that they were doing, like that, being in an area that they weren't supposed to be in, completely disobeying the young person who had held the authority but couldn't, physically keep them from going into the room.
These were workmen that were putting the solar panels or whatever on the roof of the museum?
This was one particular supervisor, and at this point, I no longer remember what company he worked for. At the time, I would have been able to identify him. He wasn't one of the workmen themselves, but he was the supervisor of one of the construction companies. And there were so many different ones at that point because there were roofers, and there were, glass guys, and there were, I don't know, lots of other different types of guys.
Do you remember that guy's name?
I don't remember the company or the name. And maybe if I saw a picture, I might be able to identify him. But yeah, I can't remember his name from this long ago.
That's incredible information. For the record, we had not heard that, but you had told that to the FBI, I take it?
Yeah, I don't know what the FBI has done with any of the information they've received. There was something the Boston Globe did maybe a year or two ago. They had a story. It was when the tape was released that showed the person entering the museum the night before, and there was a big discussion about who is this guy that entered. Was this a practice run because it was the night before? There was a question of if it was a practice run. And I actually called the tip line because although the video was grainy and old, I'll say 99% certain it was the security supervisor that had been on duty, earlier that evening. He had forgotten his wallet and had returned to the museum to pick up the wallet. And if one looks very closely at that video, you can actually see at that time, people had those photo inserts in their wallet. So you can see the light kind of bouncing off of the plastic photo insert as the wallet's being looked through. It's far in the sort of left corner of that video, but it's pretty apparent that, especially when you know that detail, that that's what is happening. So I had left information with the FBI about who I was, why I had this certainty, the fact that I worked there during the day, the fact that Larry O'Brien had been my supervisor, the fact that he had worked that night before and had just returned. And I never got a call back, and to this day still haven't received a call back. The FBI went on records.
We're calling you here on Empty Frames, Marj. We got you. We're taking over.
All right.
There's so much to unpack
FBI
here.
did
Hold
go-
on a
they went on
second.
record.
Hold
Tim is
on a
fired
second
up.
here. So, okay, just want to confirm. You're saying Larry O'Brien is the guy in the video from the night before?
Yeah, I'm very certain.
Okay. And going back to the previous thing we were talking about, so that this fellow from one of the construction companies who snuck behind into this security room, you said he was in there for a while, and this is the room where all the tapes are and all. I imagine this is the security room where the thieves must have been that night to have taken out the tape that showed the thieves' faces. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And so how long was this guy in there?
It probably was 5 or 10 minutes. It was until a security supervisor could come back to the desk to help me.
And so you called your security supervisor, which was, I guess at that time, would that have been Larry O'Brien?
I think that day it was a different supervisor.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember. I remember what he looked like, but again, I can't remember his name. He was a taller guy with brown hair. I don't think that description really helps you, but Larry wasn't the supervisor that I called that particular time.
So what did this fellow say after the security person got him out of the room? And I imagine you weren't too happy with him. Did he have any explanation for what he was doing in there?
I think the security supervisor would have asked him that. I didn't have further contact with him at that point. I think I was probably on the phone at the point when he came out of the room. And even if I wasn't, I think he probably just, smugly walked away, or he didn't acknowledge me or he didn't apologize or anything like that.
But that's a weird act during the course of your run at that job. That was unusual. Not a lot of people did that kind of thing.
No. I mean, people were mostly respectful. People came in. The procedure was they came in, they logged in, they were given a badge, a little ID badge that had a number so that we could track. The number was put by their name, so you could track that badge ID. I think that's probably information that the FBI gathered, I would imagine, because I actually was asked by one of the Boston Globe guys about an ID that was found. But for me, there's no way at this point to be able to really comment much about that without the records or a record of the day and who that badge would have been given to and why it wouldn't have been turned in. Like I had mentioned to before, I left at 3:30. So if there were if there were construction people that stayed after that point, the next shift would have been responsible for gathering those IDs. But yeah, the guys usually came in, they checked in, they did that login. A security supervisor or another person on duty generally escorted them to where they were going to be working, and then they were often escorted out when they were done with their job. There were intercoms throughout the building that they could call down and let us know when they were finished.
You're listening to this podcast, but you know what is pretty close to podcast, Lance? It's audiobooks.
Audiobooks are a great sidekick for summer activities like hiking, sunbathing, on the beach, running, road tripping, etc. I do enjoy a good audiobook when I'm cooking dinner or just simply doing the laundry.
Yeah, and you have like real pros read it, like Gillian Flynn reads the I'll Be Gone in the Dark book.
Sent chills down my spine.
So Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audible.com/frames and browse the unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title for free and start listening. It's that easy.
Go to audible.com/frames or text frames to 500-500 to get started today.
But why Audible? Because you can choose so many other platforms, Lance.
Well, Audible's content includes an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and so much more from leading audiobook publishers, broadcasters, entertainers, magazines and newspaper publishers, and business information providers.
So check out Audible today. You can share a book from your library with anyone, and if it's their first time accepting a book through this feature, they can listen for free.
As many did listen for free as we were promoting Michelle McNamara's I'll Be Gone in the Dark, sending that link out to as many people as possible.
There's also chapter navigation, which makes things easy, speed control, listen faster or slower, navigation at the speed that suits you.
And what's Whisper Sync for voice?
You just switch back and forth, reading and listening your audiobook across many devices, including Amazon's Kindle and Echo, without ever losing your place or missing a word.
This is technology, the world we live in. I love it.
So do it. Go to audible.com/frames or text frames to 500-500 to get started. Back to that security room real quick. Is that the kind of thing like you could like did you know from your position like what you would have had to have done to get rid of the evidence if you were going to let your friends in to the museum? Do you know what I mean? Like as far as where the tapes are and things like that.
I mean, I knew where the devices were that recorded the tapes. I don't know if any of us would have tampered with those or, tried to erase something. I think that would become pretty apparent if someone was trying to tamper with or erase tapes. Like if you're suggesting that a guard let their friends in and then tried to modify the tape to clear out that part, I think that would be pretty evident that happened.
Well, I guess to be transparent, what I'm trying to ask or wonder is how many people in the museum, especially at the guard level, or the night watchman level, would have known, exactly where in that room they would have had to have gotten tapes out of. Is that just like something you can just walk in there and spend like 5 minutes like mystery construction guy did, and you can just relay that information to thief 1 and thief 2 and they're in and out of there and that's it? That
I would think so. It wasn't a huge office. It wasn't highly sophisticated technology like maybe today's technology. It was, VHS tape type stuff on a big black box with, a little TV monitor that showed the screen. So I think it was pretty apparent, even trying to think back exactly of what it looked like. I mean, I remember it was sort of to the right, or the door was flush against the wall, but it was to the right of the desk. So you enter, say the door's on your left-hand side, the desk is on your right-hand side. That equipment was right next to the desks. It wasn't hard to figure out. It wasn't a
Okay.
huge office.
Right. So it wasn't like a Vegas casino security room or something like that.
It wasn't like Mission Impossible with 50 screens all around. Yeah, no, it was pretty simplified.
So when this happened and you lived with your roommates with other employees and other guards of the museum, how long was it before the FBI contacted you guys? How long was it before they knocked on the door of, I'm imagining the apartment that was it 4 of you lived in?
6 of us that lived there, but the FBI inquiries were all done at the museum because they interviewed everyone that worked at the museum. So they never came to our house to interview us. I was just interviewed as part of the staff.
What kind of questions did they ask you?
I do remember they asked about drugs. There was a big focus about people smoking pot at the watch desk or on in the museum, or gallery guards taking drugs or something like that. So they asked questions about that. I told them about the guy, that story that I just shared with you. And I told them about any other strange calls or things that would have happened at that point. I don't remember specifically the questions that I asked, because it was a intimidating scenario where, for me, I was placed in a I wasn't placed in a seat, but I was escorted to a seat and told to sit down. And there were two guys, and they stood over me. And at the time I was, I don't know, 22, 23 or something around there. And it's the FBI. It was a scary scenario to be in, regardless of whether you had done anything to feel uncomfortable about. It just was uncomfortable to have these two government officials staring down at you.
You knew Richard Abbott. You referred to him as Rick. What was he like?
I mean, he was a musician also. I like Rick. I didn't have any problem with Rick. It's interesting over time to have read different articles or, uh, material that's come out about the robbery, or Rick, or the stipulations about Rick. I mean, Rick was a smart guy. I don't think anyone, and actually, if I'm going to sidestep for a second, a thing that tends to happen is this perception of guards being, a bunch of young jokesters that don't really care about what they're doing, don't care about their job. But I feel the people that were employed, although we were all artists of some nature, we were all intelligent people. Maybe there were some people that cared more about their job than others, just like any job. One of the things I found interesting about him, I learned that for a while he had been a deadhead, and he followed the Grateful Dead. And that's something I don't want to use that as a describer for him, but at that time I had never met anyone that, followed a band around. So I found that interesting. But we used to, I mean, just like I did with many of the other guards at the time, we hung out socially a few times and went to a few parties. Or I remember one time going to his house and having a cup of tea with him. Um, that sounds so civilized, and it was. He was a decent, at least to me, he was a decent guy.
Did he ever happen to mention the Che Tortoni? Speaking of, did he ever happen to be like, yeah, I really love that painting?
Yeah, I know where this one's going because I've heard about this too. No, we never talked much about the museum or the art in the museum. We talked more about, when we got together, we talked more about music and um, different bands that we were interested in, and things like that.
So, but what about the motion detectors? I guess my question ultimately boils down to that, right? So, the motion detectors at the museum showed that the thieves, the two thieves who were let into the museum that night, never made it into the Blue Room, which is where the Che Tortoni hung on the wall. And so, based on those, the motion detectors, it would imply that one of the guards took the Che Tortoni off the wall that night.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really feel qualified to talk about that or discuss it, because I don't know anything about that. I was never really privy to what the motion detectors discovered or recorded. I mean, I guess that's what the evidence points to, but I don't know. It doesn't seem very realistic or logical to me. I'm aware that the last person that was recorded in the room was Rick, per the swipes that he did with the reader. I guess Randy never made it on a round through that room when the robbery occurred, but it seems like there'd be a lot of maneuvering to get that painting out. The way the watch desk worked at that point, one person was always at the desk while the other one either did rounds or went to the bathroom or ate dinner or whatever the scenario was. So for Rick to, I've heard a theory about Rick placing up it outside the door or something like that. For Rick to have done something like that, he would have had to walk past Randy, you know, with the painting hidden and gone outside for, some inexplicable reason or made up some sort of excuse to Randy to get outside. So, there's some working parts that would have to be in action for that to have occurred. That's all I really can say about it. I've never really, to me, it seems kind of far-fetched. It's hard to imagine that he would have done that. But, just like any sort of scenario when someone's done something quite horrible, the first thing people say is, I can't believe that person did that. He never struck me as the type. So, I don't know.
Well, the scenario is really interesting because the thieves took 81 minutes to do what they did. So that means that they knew that there was really no emergency. Obviously, people go to the inside angle aspect of it, but if there wasn't, it's sort of a contradiction. If there was an inside angle and they knew they had all the time in the world, why would Rick take that painting and put it outside to save time?
Right.
When he already knew that, like if there was an inside angle, why would he try to facilitate or expedite anything when it really doesn't matter because you had pretty much all night?
Exactly. I don't know. And it's not like that room was locked or hard to access or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know.
Right. So I guess my point in that was not so much a question, just like the motion detectors go off and people go to, well, who was in there? It was the guards, the night watchmen were in there. And no, it could be somebody. It doesn't have to be those people. It could have been somebody that had, placed themselves in there. There's just a lot more that encapsulates that moment there that some people just don't think of, I guess.
What about those guys? Like your old roommate and Rick. In the days and weeks afterwards, you guys must have talked about the investigation, because I'm pretty sure Rick was I'm pretty sure the FBI thought he was their inside source for a long time. I don't know if they still do or what the story is, but I mean, I think it's commonly believed for him to have been. And I'm certainly, by the way, not saying that we think that. We're actually trying to do our best to prove the opposite here on this show.
Mm-hmm. I never really had much discussion after the robbery with Rick, to be honest. And as I mentioned earlier, Randy really retreated and didn't really, it took him a while to recover from that incident. So we didn't have discussions. I didn't have discussions with those guys about the robbery at all. I mean, regardless whether it is factual or not that Rick was involved with that, I think the scenario of being tied up, being duct taped and put into the basement of the museum and down there for hours, not knowing how long it's going to be before someone finds you. It's a pretty horrifying scenario. So those guys didn't want to talk about it,
Yeah, so Randy never confided in you and said, this is what happened that night. He got a call on his walkie-talkie, and it was Rick, and he said that there were police at the front. So he just withdrew.
We didn't talk about it.
That's interesting. I mean, it's obvious, but it's,
we
why
became roommates years later in a different apartment, different scenario with much fewer people. But even at that point, we didn't reflect upon that time. We didn't sit around and talk about it.
That's crazy to think of, because I think a lot of people who listen to this show, and myself included, I would like to think that I would remember every detail, and but anyway, people who listen to this show are so used to having every piece of their personal lives put out there, and everyone sort of knows something about you. But back then that wasn't even there. Like, social media didn't exist, and people, and I can totally see somebody like your roommate and someone like Randy just withdrawing and saying, I don't really want to talk about it. And there's no reason for me to talk about it because it's done and I've told everything I need to tell to law enforcement.
Like, how much would you want to talk about something that was really disturbing in your life?
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. You go on Facebook or Twitter and people talk about anything that they want, no matter how disturbing, because it gets them attention. Back then, people, like, I wouldn't want to talk about it now. I probably wouldn't want to talk about it then. There was no reason to get it out there.
Right, and it's sort of akin to, I don't want to say that they were hit or anything like that, but it was a form of attack. These people came and they threatened them. They took their wallet. They said things like, "We know where you live," or "We know how to access your family." I think it was frightening. It's easy for us to look back, and there's been a lot of reporting about how the thieves weren't very professional and the fact that they cut the painting out. But that doesn't mean to say that they weren't highly intimidating themselves, or I don't know what type of tone they used in their voice, or, what their body language was like, or how strong they were, if they grabbed them at all. I mean, I don't know about things like that. But you can imagine even if you're walking down the street and someone tries to mug you and says, "I've got your wallet now and I know how to access everything about you." Even now, it's even more serious because of all the, identity fraud. That wasn't such an issue there at that time, but still, it's scary to have someone be able to claim that they're going to come back and get you, and you don't know if they have a gun, and they tie you up. And both of those guys were hairy guys with beards, and the duct tape did a real mess. Without going into detail about that, you can use your own imagination about how painful that would be to have that pulled off of you. And I think it would be extremely terrifying to go through that.
I agree. And I think anytime someone takes something by force, I think it's not a pleasant situation. So it's going to be nasty no matter what, and scary. And it actually makes me think, like, even if, one of those, just for example, one of those guys, like, let them in that night, because they had contact with them before, it doesn't mean that it was willingly. It doesn't mean that they weren't threatened to do that. It doesn't mean that they weren't really tied up and weren't really threatened, even if they were, had been contacted before.
Yeah. That's an interesting point.
By the time they realized these paintings were stolen from the Gardner, it was too late, Lance.
It was too late for them? It was too late for the law? What? What do you mean?
Well, I just mean it kind of relates to forhims.com and hair loss, because when you notice your hair is going, it's typically too late.
That was a great segue.
Thanks.
So I ask you, do you want your hairline to recede, or do you want to do something about it first?
Well, I would definitely do something about it first, Lance. And the solution is forhims.com, a one-stop shop for hair loss, skincare, sexual wellness for men.
Thanks to science, baldness can be optional, because hims.com connects you with real doctors and medical-grade solutions to treat hair loss.
Well-known generic equivalents to name-brand prescriptions to help you keep your hair.
And because you stop at a lot of gas stations, you see those snake oil pills or gas station counter supplements. That's not what this is. This is prescription solutions backed by science.
The snake oil pills look tasty, but I think I know better, Lance. So order now. Our listeners get a trial month of Hims for just $5 today, right now, while supplies last. See website for full details. This offer would cost hundreds if you went to a doctor or pharmacy.
So go to forhims.com/frames. That's forhims, FORHIMS.com/frames. frames.
forhims.com/frames.
But don't slash Rembrandts. I want to go back real quick to the video from the night before and just be clear about one thing. The older gentleman in the video, who is not possibly Larry O'Brien, the older gentleman with the glasses who appears in the video, is that the guard who called out?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
his name was Malvi. I think it was Joseph Malvi.
You still talk to Rick and Randy?
No, I haven't talked to either of them in many years. The last I had heard from Randy, he had moved to Germany. He was a trombone player, and he got a position in a band in Germany, so he went out there. I believe he's back at this point, but yeah, no, I've fallen out of contact with him, and with Rick, I basically, after the robbery, he wasn't comfortable in the museum any longer, and I can't remember if he was fired or if he left of his own accord, but once he left the museum, like, we basically lost touch as well.
Was there a big drop-off in employees after the heist?
I don't really recall. I don't remember. I mean, there were a lot of changes, obviously, that the museum went through, but it wasn't like there was a mass firing or anything like that. To me, as odd as this will sound, it was one of the most memorable working experiences that I've had to date, because it was a time. The museum was always quite a lot like a family, but it was a time when that family really, everyone pulled together. Everyone really worked hard to lift the museum back up, and everyone supported each other. It sounds so minor to say it like that. It's kind of a hard thing to describe, but it was a scenario where it was a difficult situation that the museum was going through, and it just was nice to have everyone just support each other and put in the extra hours and put in the extra effort and put on their best face and not crumble under the pressure and perform really well. So it's something. I'm not happy that the robbery happened, but it was an interesting and working environment to be part of at that time.
The way you describe it, it's amazing to me. It sounds like almost like a tight-knit family who kind of gets even closer because of this
Tragedy.
great family tragedy that happens. It's kind of amazing.
That is exactly what it was like.
I just have a couple more questions. One of them is about the video from the night before again. When did you first see it, and how did you first see it?
I think a friend shared it with me, because a lot of my friends joke about, there's another thing with the robbery. Or Marj, where did you hide the paintings? People joke like that.
I'm sure you find those jokes hilarious.
Well, it's funny. I mean, if you saw my 1-bedroom apartment, you would know that I clearly do not own any $1 million paintings of any nature.
Whoa! How do you know they're $1 million?
But yeah, someone had sent me the link, so I checked it out and watched it, and yeah, that's how I discovered it. And then I think the link was part of the Boston Globe article. Maybe they sent the whole article, or I might have dug a little bit and found the article. Either way, I read the article and read the theories about like some antique dealer or something like that. So it inspired me to call the FBI line and just share the information I had. And I also sent an email to the Boston Globe just saying, I want to highlight the fact that you have written this because I disagree with you guys.
Okay, so you volunteered the information to the FBI and you did not hear back.
Correct.
And you volunteered information to the Boston Globe, and what was their response?
I did. Steve Kirchen, he wrote the book Master Thieves, got in touch with me right away, and we've maintained a correspondence, and we've talked about different theories and different ideas that he's had over the last couple of years. So he was very interested in what I had to say.
Was there any part of the conversation that came up where anyone speculated as to why that video was released? If the FBI, if law enforcement had this video and then they released it in 2015, we know that Larry O'Brien died in 2014. They released it about a year later after he died. Did anyone ask, between the people that you've spoken with, did the feds talk to Larry O'Brien and say, are you the guy in this video?
I wondered why the video was released at that time. Actually, Steve has a very knowledgeable explanation about that, which I can't remember. I don't know if the FBI talked to Larry O'Brien or questioned him. I know Steve reached out to Larry's brother because Larry had passed away, and Larry's brother claimed it wasn't him. And I guess Lyle is still Lyle's capacities are limited at this point, and he wasn't really much help, I think, in the identifying process.
You're talking about Lyle Grindle, the
correct.
Yeah, okay. Was he the head of security then?
Yes, he was the head of security at that time.
Right, and Larry's brother David, I think he was like 81 or something when they asked him about the video, and he said, no, I think my brother's hair was a little bit longer or something. It didn't seem like, when I read that, it was nothing that struck me as something that was a definitive, it's kind of tough to tell whether that guy's hair is long or short in that video.
Yeah. Larry was a difficult person for a female to work with, and several of us had situations with him, so he was an easy person for us to remember quite clearly because of the issues that we all had with him.
What kind of issues did you have with him?
It's like a whole nother
I know
podcast.
I know. We've been going for 55 minutes and you dropped that bombshell.
We'll get you on Crawlspace for that.
Yeah.
It was different forms of sexual harassment.
Wow.
Different and repeating with different employees?
Correct.
Wow. I'm sorry.
Jesus, yeah, really.
Yeah, there were issues with some of the other people. I think he eventually might have even been fired because of it. I wasn't involved with that, but yeah, I think that is ultimately what happened.
Did you have to go through background checks to get the job at the Gardner?
I'm sure that we did. The application process, that was so long ago, because we're going back to 1988. I mean, I'm sure I filled out some sort of application. I would imagine they did some sort of background check, but I wasn't involved with HR or how they did things. So, and I can't remember what was asked on the job form.
And now our buddy Mr. K makes a rare appearance and asks Marj a few questions.
Was it common for employees to enter the museum after hours?
No, it wasn't. When Larry entered, I mean, he was a supervisor. It is curious that, I guess it's curious about the way he was buzzed in or didn't use his pass key. I think it's kind of cut out from the video, so it's hard to see if he actually had his pass key, but his car is identifiable as his. I think he just pulled up and wanted to get in, get his wallet. He wasn't, as that video shows, he wasn't there for very long.
It sounds like you're very confident that that's him retrieving his wallet, so there's no other possibility really in your mind about what that video depicts.
For me, like I said, I'm 99% sure. I leave 1% open for error. But the haircut, the square face, the upturned collar, the big watch on his wrist, even the way he kind of slouched, everything to me says that it was Larry. Even though the video is not clear and you can't really zoom in or look at it closely, I'm certain by all of those details that it's Larry.
How confident are you that the FBI shares your view on the identity of the person in the video?
I'm not confident. I don't know what the FBI believes or what they're doing, but my personal theory is, it might be something like with the whole Whitey Bulger scenario where you had this sort of crime boss, this gang boss that had an in with the FBI. And I think the FBI might just, I feel like they might actually have a lot more information, but they're not investigating it to protect other people. But I just feel like there's something up with the whole scenario. I've never really understood. I know at the time I was young and probably not as confident as I am now, but I still was in a position where I saw every person that entered the museum during the day. And all of the, like I said, all of those construction workers. I had access to all of the people that were sort of behind the scenes at the museum. And no one's ever, outside of that one questioning, no one's ever really asked me about it. The most involvement I had with the FBI, for a while, they were keeping tabs on Randy's whereabouts. So every now and then for a few years after the robbery, they would call and just ask if I had heard from Randy or if I knew where Randy was. And that's it. That's the extent. I felt like no one ever really took me too seriously. I don't really understand why.
Did anything strange happen at the museum after the theft?
I mean, it's the sort of thing that you hopefully would have never I don't think anyone had ever experienced a theft of that magnitude, so it's hard to really know what would be normal and what would be strange. I mean, it all was strange, but I mean, there's nothing like that sticks out as sort of like, oh, the thieves have come back or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of hard to quantify what's strange after what just happened, right?
Right. I mean, it's the sort of thing that, it would be like if an earthquake just happened right now. For me, everything that would happen after it would be strange because I have experienced little earthquakes here, but I've never experienced anything where I've seen the ground rip open.
Right.
And so everything would be strange after that.
You seem very trusting of your colleagues, and based on the explanations you gave, that sounds warranted. But was there anyone at the museum that suspected that the theft was aided by another museum employee?
People at the museum themselves wondered about the wealth of information they seem to have about getting around the museum, or there was a discussion I had with like some of the Boston Globe people about the fact that the museum was pitch black, because remember, it's the robbery is happening in the evening. The museum is closed down. There's no lights in the galleries. This is something I'd never really thought about until this discussion had happened, but it is true that you wouldn't have seen anything because it's completely dark. So the thieves had to kind of know what they were doing a little in advance because the lights weren't on and they weren't necessarily easy to figure out how to turn on. So they either would have to know where the lights were to get the light switches on, or they'd have to just kind of know where the paintings were and using a flashlight take them that way. It wasn't, either way, it's not an easy scenario. So there are things like that just cause you to stop and wonder. But no one ever pointed fingers saying, I think it was this person or I think it was that person.
Before 2015, when you called the FBI hotline, had you ever proactively contacted the people involved with the investigation with information you thought would be helpful?
No, because prior to that, I didn't see anything that, really necessary for me to be involved with. I think most of the reporting that I had seen up to that date was talking about how Rick lived in New Hampshire, or there was reporting about, oh, now it's X many years, or, from time to time there was some art thief that was in jail that claimed that he had the paintings in a hangar or something. There were all these sort of random stories, but none of them really had information that was relevant to me or my experience.
Is there anything that hasn't been done that you think could be helpful in recovering the artwork?
It's interesting because so much time has passed. It's sort of like those cold cases. It's maybe there's a DNA test that they could do on the paint chips that might be helpful. A lot of the key players that have been involved with the robbery are passing on, and you're losing those connections. So without something like this, like you guys giving me the opportunity to talk about it or reflect upon different details, without those recordings or those questions, or just going back and piecing together everyone's different stories or the different things that they remember, maybe that's something. I don't know if something like that has ever been done, but until now, no one's really been asking me about what's your story, what's your memory. You worked at the museum, you sat there at that desk. What do you recall? Up until this point, that's not something that was done to me.
Empty Frames is a co-production of Crawlspace Media and Audioboom, with original music by Jared Jansen.
Thank you very much for listening. Follow us on Twitter at empty_frames. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a great interview with an interesting guy named Arthur Brand, who is an art investigator.
And then what you read is these thieves were amateurs. Well, they were not, because they did the job, didn't they? If they are alive, they are reading this and they smile at each other. They think, what are they talking about?